All right. Clock just went to 3, and I'm going to start because I already started a few minutes ago, so sorry about that. The talk is called Raiders of the Lost Arts, and if you had a look in your booklet that you got this morning, you might have seen that the talk in the booklet actually is called Stefan Hager by Stefan Hager, which could be the world's shittiest perfume or just a very, very self-absorbed talk. I considered, doing new slides and just talking about myself for an hour, but I couldn't find anybody who would lock the doors and put chains around them, so we're stuck with Raiders of the Lost Arts. As always, with my talks, I will have a few disclaimers. The first disclaimer is I'm going to tell you about numbers, statistics, and other things. And some of the things I've taken off blogs, websites, and so on and so forth. Because as a researcher, you have that slight dilemma whether you believe those websites or you test it yourself. So, for example, if the Tunisian Ministry of War is still using Gopher, do you test it out? Well, you might. Do you still test whether some files are available, what you can do with it? Maybe not. Maybe you do. I didn't. The other thing that you can see by this wonderful graphic is I do not really embrace large language models, but having a shitty Stable Diffusion instance painting the slides for me is really good. Saves me work. And it's a total coincidence that the new Indiana Jones is out right now. And the second kind of disclaimers is I'm not a lawyer. If you look at me and think, lawyer, then what's wrong with you? This is not legal advice, and even if I phrase it like you should do this and that to do this and that, I don't mean it. Don't do crime. And basically, this talk is a little bit about being a dick. It's a little bit about how do I waste resources of a company just for the sake of it. And by resources, I don't mean IT resources, but we'll come to that later. Some IT resources may be, but why? Why this talk? Well, the one thing is, I haven't heard a talk that is going on about all the stuff that we have to deal with, and we just kind of accept it. Some of the stories are not really very technical, but I hope they are entertaining. And I would also like to manage your expectations a little bit. It's about old and ancient problems that are still haunting us. I figure there are some real-life cases from my company and other companies. Of course, not from my company boss, no. Couldn't talk about those, right? But it should be all applicable if you are working for a reasonably large organization where politics come into play. And we often really don't think about what happens when we are compromised. Very often what I hear is, well, if the attacker has compromised us and is in the network, then we've got more severe problems than what you are lining out. Which is true, but why should we make it easy for an attacker? And just to be clear, I very often have this slide where I see the attacker or where I see the attacker for this kind of presentation. I like to put just an X and Y axis there and say one axis is how skilled the attacker is. Is it somebody who just can execute a script? Or is it somebody like a nation state who can write their own tools? And whom are they targeting? Are they targeting everyone because something is unpatched? Or are they targeting specifically my company and everything in between? So today I'd like to talk about someone who's maybe on the inside. For some things they don't have to be on the inside, but for the first part they do. And who really just want to make our life hard. And for that I have to talk a little bit about the early days. Well, you know me, and I've got gray hair and everything, and yada yada yada, been in the industry for a bit. But basically in the really early days, trust on the internet wasn't really that much of a problem from a technical perspective. You didn't really have to verify if the person you were talking to was the person you were talking to, because impersonation and so on, that was just not an issue from a purely technical point of view. Has that changed? Also in the early days, speed was not really an issue. Well, I should clarify that speed, of course, was the biggest issue. This on the left, not exactly this model, but this was the first thing I used to go on Usenet. This thing manages 300 bits per second. And now if you think about a horny 20-year-old who wants to see titties, how long it takes to load, that was just not an option. So speed was just not there, not the kind of bandwidth that we have now and that we can use now. Crime as well. I remember that the early days of crime in the internet was mostly website defacing. So if somebody actually managed to break into your web server, probably the worst that happened is they wrote, "I was here. Great, shitty website." And they left. Nowadays, crime is organized. And they also have a budget. And if they really manage to overtake your domain, they won't announce that they have done it. They will abuse your domain. They will try to get your data and use your resources. So that has changed. Availability, another cool thing. Nowadays, at least I'm speaking for myself, I get disgruntled if I want to access a service and it doesn't load within the first 3 seconds or something. Think, shit thing. When I started out doing security for a group of banks, that was, I think, sometime at the end of the 90s, 2000, the former boss that I had, the CEO of the company actually, said, "Well, you do your stuff with the internet, but if it's down for 2 or 3 hours, don't bother informing the clients. And if it goes down overnight, then don't come in. It's okay if you fix it in the morning." Has that changed? Slightly. The CEO of my company, the CEO back then, also I think 2005-ish, said, and I put my glasses on so I can do the citation right, if the web server is down, no, that was the other thing, we are using the internet, but we do not need it. Which is cool, which shows he was really eager to have new technology, but we shouldn't rely on it. And again, has that changed? Everything, each and every single point of those that I just said has changed in the perception and everything. So that's good, right? Problem is, the underlying design hasn't changed. Which means some of the stuff that we are dealing with nowadays is the stuff that is there since the dawn of the internet. Problem also is that you can't really get easily rid of it. This is a paper. It's time to replace TCP in the data center from this year, from January, where the author makes a really good point that TCP is not performant in data centers and we should swap it out for a different protocol. And this is one of my problems with academia. This person might be completely right, but I would say if you, in any company, and each of you, if you go to whoever manages the budget and say, we need a completely different data center. We need to swap all the components because the old ones can't deal with it, and we want to be faster, and it costs us a few million, a few 100 million, depending on your company. Not everybody is going to be happy and say, we are going to do that. If you disagree, fine, have you IPv6 in your network? Because that's the next thing. 20 years ago, IPv6 was born, and everybody kind of agrees that we need to use it more, but basically v4 is still there, and we're using it. So good luck with swapping out TCP. And security is always an afterthought. It can't be anything different. Of course, you can bake security into your product, into your protocol, whatever it is. But basically, somebody clever, one of you maybe, we'll find a way to circumvent that, and there will be a patch. There might be new RFCs. These are just the RFCs regarding DNS, DNSSEC, since it came out. Everything just patched on, and an afterthought. So of course that makes Indy very sad. And on that doom and gloomy note, there's a lot of unencrypted and unauthenticated protocols each of the companies we work for runs, because that's how the internet works. Let's talk a little bit about internal protocols and have a little bit of fun. And the obvious elephant in the room, I'm starting with that, is DNS, started in the 1980s. And it's abused very often. If you are in a network that is really flat and that has no security preventions and you're on the inside, then faking DNS can be really easy. But you can't run your network without DNS. Or, okay, technically you can, but do you really want to? I'm guessing you don't. No, the mic still works, okay. The thing is, there are a few things you could do to make it more secure. You can have a few of the machines that are really, really important on different network segments. You can have them in a hosts file. And again, this is things that need to be done. I've talked to the CISO of Maersk a few months ago when they had the security incident, said until that time, Maersk, that global company, logistics company, had a flat network. So if you're still running a flat network, this would be the first thing. Don't. And the next thing is syslog. Everybody loves syslog. Well, I know that, Kev, you don't that much. But usually you use syslog, and it's a really easy tool because it listens, and if you send any message to the syslog server, it will just log it with all the details you gave it. The problem again here is it's UDP. UDP, at its very core, can be faked. With TCP, you've got a handshake, you roughly know that the other person at least operates under that IP address. With UDP, you can fake it. If you can fake it, well, you could, for example, get your coworker in trouble because you could fake syslog messages, making it seem he watched porn during work hours or did whatever nefarious things. You could make up new problems. Or you could find old problems that you really liked and replay them. Or you could find a playbook by the SOC and say look what they are doing when specific messages come in, and try if they really follow their playbook. Watch them go. You could be the Ernest Hemingway of syslog messages, the Franz Kafka, whoever. And the thing about syslog is usually it's not that good secured because you want messages to arrive at the syslog server, you want to log them, and so on and so forth. And again, this is not how you get the company down. This is how you burn resources at the company, because somebody is going to look at these syslog messages and somebody is going to do something about it, or trying to do something. When we carry on, we come to another thing, SNMP. I put the Bollock Brothers LP there because it says in private and public, and now I'm realizing it's so small that you probably can't see it, and it totally doesn't make sense, but never mind. This was in the 1990s. If you're not familiar with SNMP, it's a protocol where you can map networks, basically. It deals with communities, and the two default communities are private and public, and if you connect with a public as the community, you get all the information about the network publicly available about that network device, because it was mostly network devices. Like, this is a Cisco router, I'm running this firmware, I'm running this iOS, whatever. The community private, on the other hand, allowed you to write as well. And that's, of course, also funny. But again, if you can read network devices, if you see how packets are routed, if you're lucky, you can see how firewalls are configured, at least roughly. Then as an attacker, you've got a problem. Which brings me back to the statement at the beginning. that if the attackers are in the network, we have different problems. Yes, we do, but just don't hand them everything once they are in. TFTP is a protocol where you can upload files, download files to network devices again. This is really cool because it works via UDP as well. And for some network devices, it's really easy. There was a Palo Alto firewall I had, and if you wanted to install a new operating system on it, just put a new image via TFTP on the device. It rebooted, it had the new image, which is cool for a sysadmin, but actually at some point they had a bug, so everybody could do it without authentication, which sucks. And the last one in the group is NTP. Again, I don't want to play that, I'm old card too often, but NTP at the beginning when we built networks, when we had a small IT, NTP very often wasn't that much of a concern because it wasn't that important that every device had the same time. I remember that at one time, at one company, we had, 20, 25 firewall clusters, and each of them had a different time. Because whoever built them at the time couldn't be bothered to put in the right time zone. Well, they all had the same time, but they were all in different time zones, virtually, although they were all in the same data center physically. So whether you wanted to go to Mexico or Israel or wherever, you would find a firewall that had that time zone on it. Doesn't really make sense, I know. But people weren't just bothered. Today, if you think about cryptography, about tokens, about expiry dates, and last but not least, logging, each and every device should have the correct timestamp. So NTP is really very, very important. What can you do if you combine all these, if you find them? Well, you can probably really create a lot of havoc. NTP gives you the nice thing that if you manage to modify DNS in a way that everyone who asks for the NTP server gets your IP address, you can be the NTP authority for that whole thing. And then you can have some kind of cascading failure going on with NTP. You can do a lot of stuff, stupid stuff. Which brings us to the interesting question, is it a honeypot? Because some of you might remember I had a talk about honeypots a few years earlier, and I was really in favor of honeypots, I still am. But in this case, if it is a honeypot or not, to be frank, who cares? If it's a honeypot, you are even entertaining people who are higher paid, usually, than the first level desk. So it's good if it's a honeypot. So what can you do about it? Because so far I haven't told you a lot of new stuff. This is in our networks, this is in our systems. We did a lot with segmentation, we did a lot with TFTP and others, and sometimes you just don't use those UDP protocols anymore. But some of those protocols allow for more security. Just have a look at it, see if you can do it, and see if it affects traffic, because some of the protocols allow for TCP communication, but TCP, of course, as you know, has a larger overhead than UDP, so maybe you can't use it. That was all the internal stuff. What can you do from the external side? First of all, if you're providing NTP, TFTP, or any of the other services to the external side on the internet, I would like to ask politely again, what is wrong with you? You might need it. It might be a business case for you that you do. Then please secure it accordingly. If not, then just don't do it. I mentioned the Tunisian Ministry of War because they came up on my radar while I was researching the talk. Because they had still a lot of old Windows protocols running. Does any one of you remember quote of the day, character generator, and all the other stuff that you used to have on Windows? Yeah, they had all these running. They had Gopher, they had others. I wasn't quite sure because I didn't poke a lot, whether this was really just a honeypot or whether the Tunisian military is maybe on the same level as the Russians, I don't know. But you've got the same problems from the outside. You've got a few more. You've got ICMP as well. And if you are providing UDP services to the outside, then there's one thing where you should really, really be aware of. And you probably are. And that is UDP amplification. So whenever someone wants to attack a target via DDoS, what they usually do is they find some kind of amplifier, an open protocol, let's say DNS. They fake their sender address so that the resolving DNS server says, all right, I've got an answer here, and it's for this address. But the address is the one of the target. So the attacker doesn't get the return traffic, the target gets it. And if the attacker does that with enough services or servers, then the target will be overwhelmed. The problem with that is, if you're one of the amplificators, then legally you are in a questionable state. The traffic came from your server. I don't know about UK law that much. I know a little bit more about German law. Again, not a lawyer, look at me. But it is, if you can't really prove that you were just a victim as well, you might be in trouble. You probably won't, but you might. So how bad are amplification factors? I've just listed a few of the protocols. NetBIOS is okay, SNMP is okay. NTP, if asked the right questions, can amplify up to, I think it's something like 540 times the original packet, which gives you kind of an impression, but I have several slides because as soon as I take SLP into context, SLP is the Service Location Protocol, and the CVE to abuse that is actually from this year. It's 2023-29552. Somebody wants to look it up, from April, and it has a factor of about 2,200. But again, another slide, because nobody so far has managed to have the same amplification factor as Memcached, which went to 51,000. So if you're hearing about DDoS attacks with an enormous bandwidth in the gigabit range or anything, then very often you will have one of those protocols, because the attacker doesn't have a really big line as well. But if you have enough amplifiers, then yeah, you can create havoc. So really, please think about the UDP services you provide to the outside and how you do it. So that's the first half of the fun. And I'm sorry, I'm just saying this was the most technical part of it. If you didn't enjoy that, please stay. If you enjoyed that, please stay. I'd also like to talk about human expectations, how to exploit them. It's not really social engineering. It's a little bit social engineering, but we're not really directly interacting with the people we want to provoke or we want to get into trouble. When you know how processes work in a company, and if that company is one of those who stick to their own processes, which not every company does, then you have a playbook yourself how you can abuse that. And the first thing I would like to talk about is mimicry. So again, in a talk a few years ago, I, as well as many others, had that example of the USB sticks on the drive, on the parking lot. You know, the example back then was, there was a study in, I think it was either Michigan or Minnesota, US university with a capital M, let's leave it at that. And they did a test. They just put USB sticks on the parking lot. I'm pretty sure you know the story. Can you just give me a show of hands if you know the story? Yes. Okay. There are a few who didn't. And they had malware, or well, it wasn't malware, but it was a software that called home, and they measured that about 57% of people plugged the USB stick in. If it was socially engineered to say something like, I don't know, Charlotte's Picks, or if it had some keychain on it, and so on and so forth. But that is not my point. My point is that we used that example, and by we I mean me and others, so often that it found its way into security awareness trainings. The numbers found their way into security awareness trainings, and people were told to do not plug the USB stick in, because here are the numbers. This is an example, just don't do it. And guess what? People don't do it because the new process is hand that USB stick over to the forensics department, if you have one, or the SOC, or whatever. And that is great for us, because now we're wasting the time of people who are really, really well paid. And you don't even have to put malware on them. You just grab a nice chunk of def random, put a few magic bytes in it, wrap it into a zip, put a password on it, and then people will try to crack it to see whatever you wanted to have in the network. So yeah, occupy your colleagues, be nice. I've been on a training by the ENISA, which is a European agency for security in the cyberspace. I said cyber, sorry. But I've got nobody drinking. Might as well. And one of their challenges was to analyze a USB stick which looked, frankly, quite like a normal regular USB stick that you would find at a private home. It had 2 movies on it. And I immediately thought, hey, it's the ENISA. When they put a Hollywood movie on that stick, they will have permission. And if they get permission to put a Hollywood movie on that stick, then the payload is there. So I went to analyze the heck out of these files, just to find out that, no, they were lazy and they had to fill the stick somehow, so they put 2 movies on it. But that's a different story. Another thing you could do is DDoS the legal department. And by DDoS this time, I don't mean use any kind of computer. If you are working for a reasonably large firm, this company will have a lot of websites, usually. You might have an internal process that says, please use our main website. But often enough, someone from marketing will not know about that, or your process might be too complicated. And they just go to GoDaddy or whatever, register domain name, put up their marketing blurb, and they're done with it. If you look hard enough, then you will find a lot of domains for any given company of certain sizes. I know that's true for the company I work for. So, what can you do with it? Usually, in Germany, we have the thing that each and every website that is not completely private needs to have an imprint with an address. It also needs to have a paragraph that says who is the DPO for that website. If there's anything GDPR related, whom can I contact? And the funny thing is, and I was told that by one of the lawyers from our department, our legal department, if they get a letter saying there's wrong information on their website, this name should be that name, or the imprint is wrong, or there's a typo in the imprint, they have to research whether this is true. Even, and that's the fun part, if they get 500 or 1,000 letters. So you could easily take all those resources from the legal department and say, well, those guys will do nothing for the next week. And if you're a friendly person, then you make it more complicated by having ChatGPT write each and every of those letters. Because why make our fingers dirty? We are in IT because we're lazy. At least I am. So why not use ChatGPT to do that? And as my lawyer said, well, not my lawyer, the lawyer at my company, that would really bring them a lot of problem and pain. And that's a nice thought, isn't it? The next thing that some people might not remember is a time before the internet where scams came via letters. don't really worry about what's written on that thing. I'm going to tell you. So my boss at some point found that in his letterbox. And it looks like a gardening service announcing their services, saying they can do all kinds of stuff and giving a phone number and when they are open and that they are giving you 30% off if you call them soon. Which is innocent enough, but the company doesn't exist. So obviously, scams via snail mail are now again becoming cheap enough so that you don't have to do scams via email, where we tell people not to click on links, but if you don't have links, you can't click on them. The end game of that one was, funnily enough, people would come around to your house, very often wouldn't have any idea what to do, and most of the times would speak a language different from yours, but they still wanted money. I'm still really puzzled by that. If anybody can later explain to me how that would work, how you have your payout as a company, I'm happy. My guess is this was tax evasion or attempted tax evasion by somebody who was an idiot. But Scott, if you listen to his talk earlier this day, already said that cyber criminals and criminals are very often not that clever. Okay. Funny thing is, I've got a few quotes for you. And I'd like to read them and just not comment them. And when I'm done, if you want to, you can try to come up with a reasonable explanation who might have said that. Okay? Start with the first one. I'm actually going to read them for you. Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. Make speeches, ironically. Talk as frequently as possible and at great length. Illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. I'm pretty sure everybody of us knows somebody like that. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committee as large as possible. Never less than 5. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Haggle over precise wordings of communications, minutes, resolutions. It's only 2 or 3 more. Refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting. I love that. Don't you love that if there's somebody you discussed with them for days, weeks, months, at some point you have a conclusion, you say, okay, we do it like that. And in your mind, you're free because you're not really discussing that topic any longer. And at the next meeting, that person stands up and said, yeah, I'd like to come back to that. I'm not really happy with it. Yes, that kind of person. And of course, advocate caution, be reasonable, urge your fellow conferees to be reasonable, avoid haste, which might result in embarrassments and difficulties later on. And the last one, multiply all the procedures and clearances involved in issuing instructions, paychecks, and so on. See that 3 people have to approve everything where 1 would do. All right, who said it? OSS. But yeah. Source isn't the imagination suppression department. It's also not my cat, but it's that field manual, Simple Sabotage Field Manual from 1944. I said this stuff is ancient, right? Where the OSS, which was, I think, kind of the CIA before the CIA was the CIA, issued that for people in countries like Germany, not for the Germans, but for other occupied countries as well, to make it as hard as possible for the other party to get their job done. Now, if you go back to some of the statements, like you need a committee to decide stuff, like you go back to minutes, like make speeches, and so on and so forth. The problem that I see is that very often, or often enough, you can see that in modern companies. If there's politics, and if it's large enough, you will have that. It doesn't mean they are all saboteurs or have read that book, but still, it's something where you could have an eye on and maybe talk to the people and say, you know, the tactics you are using have been used by secret services to sabotage other countries. So maybe reconsider, just maybe. If you don't know that building, that's fine. I don't blame you. That is the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, where the Nuremberg trials were held. But apart from the Nuremberg trials, this is still very active. It's a court of law. And the company I work for is just across the road. Why do I mention that? They get bomb threats a lot. And some of the times they might be, well, genuine. Some of the times they discover stuff. One of the times they discovered a suitcase. And so this place gets locked down. They tell us, we get locked down. But if you observe the times when we get locked down because they have a bomb threat, I came to the conclusion, and again, this is not something you should do, fourth wall, and you. If you want to issue a bomb threat against the company, don't do it against the company. Do it against the company next to them with a different security level. If they have a shitty security level, they will not communicate with the company you want to threaten. If they have a higher security level, they might, but still, the company you really target will be in the dark and will only get second-hand information. So, and of course, when you're talking about bombs and bomb threats, nobody knows about the blast radius, which was interesting in one of those cases because we got the day off or the afternoon off, which cost us, of course, but what do you do when somebody says, when your boss says, hey, we've got a bomb threat, you get the rest of the day off? Well, you don't sit around, do you? You try to get home, which means you go to the parking garage. This is opposite that building, which is quite open. Sit in your car, not protected from walls if anything explodes, and wait until 4,000 people in their cars can leave a small street that goes to the main street. And of course, had this been a bomb threat, this would have been silly because you could really have a lot more damage if the people are out in their cars or out and about and trying to leave. If there's a bomb threat next to your company, I would like you, if you're interested in that, see how your company reacts. Because that might give you an insight in how bomb threats are handled at your company and if this is a sensible thing or if there is something that could be done better. Apart from DDoSing the legal department, there's more legal fun. And again, I'm a little bit sorry because this is Germany specific, but I thought it was interesting. What's the worst that could happen if you're ransomware and not Andy? Well, you're ransomware. This is shit. If you don't have a backup, you always have the option to pay, or you think you have the option to pay. I'm not wanting to go into all the deeper connotations of what it means to pay and whether you will get a key that will unlock your stuff or not. That's not the case. In Germany, paying ransom to a ransomware gang is an interesting way to go to jail. Anybody got any idea? You are supporting a criminal organization with your money. And when you're paying them, then you have to prove that actually paying them, getting your data back, and restoring your service to the public is of greater value than whatever you paid them because you supported them. So paying ransom in Germany or ransomware off might get you in really hot trouble, which is also fun if you have an international company and have no idea about that. And one thing, it was too good to not put it in this talk. Have you heard about the wonderful lawyer who used ChatGPT to make up a few of his cases? If you haven't, I'm trying to recount the story as best as I can. I've got links to videos and other stuff at the back of the slides, at the end of the slides. And I'm going to show you a link where you can download them later on. So basically, this guy had a client. That client had a problem in an airline because he said he was in the aisle and the cart with all the drinks hit his knee, and he's so hurt now he needs a few $1 million. But it was long after 2 years, which is the normal time where you can put in such a claim. And his lawyer brought that to another court, so he had to employ another lawyer. So there were two of them. And the case he made up, the first lawyer, he had ChatGPT look for similar cases. And you know ChatGPT, it's very good in making shit up. So he got a list of cases that were successful and would be very good to include. And he even, and that's a very good thing, he even asked ChatGPT, are you sure these are real cases? And ChatGPT said, sure. And the problem with the second lawyer is he's the one who wrote the name on the whole thing, and he didn't check. And all these case numbers refer to a very specific case that you can look up in books. So, and those books didn't exist. The books existed, but the case didn't exist in the books. So the two lawyers were asked by the judge whether they could read, which is a burn, a little bit. And the judge now has to think about what to do with them. But actually I swapped these two slides. I was talking about about the made-up cases. That was that one. The real cases that can lead you into trouble, I would like to talk about an Austrian lawyer. And his client said, my privacy got violated. There is this company called Google, and I was innocently surfing this website, and they loaded Google fonts from Google, and they transmitted my IP address. This is clearly a breach of the GDPR, and I need compensation. And she wanted 190 euros, which doesn't sound that bad, except she did it 10,000 times with different companies. And her lawyer actually put in those 10,000 cases, and the court of law said quite rightly that this is not really a very clever thing to do, because the lawyer is now in hot water, because this reeks of a scam. This reeks of something that shouldn't be there. And if his client was so concerned and knows that the IP address is forwarded to Google, then why did she continue to do so? So whatever you're doing, just try to be a little bit clever about it. And the other thing is, I try to find actually who said that. Because I have that in my mind, but the people I attributed it to in my mind were the people when I tried to look it up. So if you know who said this, please tell me, and I'll happily write their name beneath it. Every new law creates new criminals. I thought it was Robert Anton Wilson, but it wasn't. What we are doing at the moment, and what really sucks in at least my view, is we are having some kind of asymmetry in the whole good guys versus the bad guys. I hope you agree. But what we are doing at the moment is we make it even harder for the good guys. To tell you a funny little story with GDPR, I wasn't allowed to tell a company my email address for a login at a web portal, although we had email contact already. But the lawyer at my company said, well, we checked email is secure, but what you want to do, we haven't checked that, and so you can't use your PII, your email address, and transmit it to Israel. I'm so tired at times. I'm sorry. And if you are working in that sector, and if you are a data privacy advocate, I'm not saying that is bad. I'm just saying maybe we are overdoing it just a little bit at the moment. Good. I'm quicker than I was at home with the whole slides. That usually happens, but I am way quicker, but it's still, we have 2 or 3 more slides to go. The thing is, you can't really do a lot about that. The funny thing is, if you are aware of what could go wrong, usually if you just lean back and detach from greed, anger, and all the emotions, then you will have a clear picture in mind if that what you want to do is good or not, or what's going on is good or not. And despite everything I said, just remember that fuck-ups happen. This is France 2018. If you thought the French flag was blue, white, red, you're obviously wrong. It's a little bit of red, bit of blue, white, and then red. Obviously, during their national holiday on the 14th of July, the fighter pilot on the left took the wrong canister or the wrong colored canister. So fuck-ups can happen. And it's also my firm belief that we should do security beyond fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So not everything that seems like somebody sabotaging your company from the inside probably is something like that. And I hope that when people are confronted with exactly that, this is a sabotage technique from 1944, that maybe they might reconsider. Some people won't. A last wonderful quote from that handbook is I'm not going to comment on that. And with that, I'd just like to say who I am. I am a German hacker. Not that German hacker. This is Dr. German Hacker, mayor of a town that is close to me. I just had to include him. How could I not? Basically, I've got some ideas from Brian, which I worked into the talk. And as I said, most of the graphics have been done by Stable Diffusion. I asked Stable Diffusion to draw a picture of themselves. It gave me a few. I included a few. Just pick the one you think who was the artist. It wasn't me. And of course me. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm on Mastodon. But you can always send me an email if you feel like it. We've got a few links. I try to include everything that I referenced here. If I forgot something, let me know and I'll send you the link. And I'll give you the time to take a picture, but I will, if I go back to that slide, yeah. No, didn't put my website on it, so sorry. Send me an email, I'll send you the presentation if you are interested in it. And as a last thing, there's the image credits for those images that I didn't take or that ChatGPT didn't, not ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion didn't draw. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening and ask you if you have any questions. I didn't say when the week started, and I've got presents for questions. No, you're quite right. Any other questions or anyone else who would like to have a sabotage handbook? The beautiful? No. But I mustn't complain because it was a gift. Anyway.
Another question. I did get DDoS by legal.
You got DDoS by legal?
Yeah.
That sounds like an interesting story.
I'm an IT contractor, and there was a local...
Can I?
Thank you. And I was asked to go into the company to take over their IT temporarily. Got through some projects and taken out an NT4 server, which got many years ago. The IT guy at the time had coded in access databases in after this date flows. It's basically
I'm sorry to hear that, although I'm smiling, but...
Yeah, I know. We have mediation sessions with judges. There is a different judge every time. It's like, I don't really know where this stands.
Yeah.
And it actually made it all the way through the court, so it's a lot of hours.
I can imagine. I mean, being at court never is fun, because you might think you're in the right, you might be in the right, but that doesn't mean the court sees it that way. I once got overrun from somebody on a bike. Sorry, just 1 second. Somebody on a bike. And if you have a look at me, I'm sorry, Mo, if I compare myself to you, but you need a little bit of speed to get me down, and I broke my shoulder and it fractured. And there was a court case because the guy who ran me down said, well, he was in the way, he went to the left, and it's his fault, really. And the court decided that it was my fault to 1/3 and 2/3 the other guy for insurance things. And I thought, how can I be the bad guy here when somebody on a bike just runs me over? But yeah, sorry.
Some great examples there of sort of ways you can tackle organization in ways that sort of involve traditional information security spheres. The question I have though is, what can those working in information security do about these very real risks that you're highlighting? So what would you recommend as steps we can take away and welcome?
Well, it depends on your role within the company and how much you are aware what's going to happen or what's happening at all. I'm sorry, camera, I'm just going up the stairs. I think the best thing is to be a little bit aware of everything that happens that is not IT necessarily. And even if it's not your role, you know, you might say, okay, I'm an IT admin, what do I care? Which is, I guess, reasonable. But if you're interested in that, then have an open mind and try to talk to the people. Because, as I said, very often fuck-ups happen. And very often, as well, people do things because they've always done the things in exactly that way. And they never question it. Does that help?
Yeah, that was a really good answer.
Thank you.
So,
Ian.
I was just going to...
Ha. Sorry, Ian, that I interrupt you. You get the special edition with a large font. Has nothing to do with the age.
I was just going to say that it's not always our role in cybersecurity to come up with a solution. So if the solution is not in the domain that you're familiar with, go and talk to the people that manage that. So in legal, if you'll go and talk to the legal team, go and talk to the other teams. Don't think that you've got to come up with a solution. You might facilitate the discussion and take the thing to them and say, well, I went to talk to Stefan and this strange German fellow said, this strange German fellow suggested this might be a problem. I thought I'd come and facilitate a discussion and see what you could do. You might put it in your crisis management plan, you might put it in somewhere else. It's not always our job to find a solution.
I completely agree.
I've also seen lots of data, lots of DDoS across the whole organisation, GDPR data requests.
Yeah.
It doesn't just do legal, it goes all the way through the company.
Yeah. And at the moment, I think it's everybody is really on the edge because GDPR has some hefty fines, and so they are overdoing it. They are overreacting, I think.
Not a question, but just a comment on the USB idea.
Yeah.
At my previous company, we did actually try this. We mailed USBs to a client in the US to see if they would plug them in. They did. Also, so did the US Postal Service.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Do you mind if I include that in the next talk? Just as a final note. Okay, thank you. Good. If there are no other questions, then thanks again. And yeah, have a nice rest of the day.